I guess I'll start. For those that don't know me, my name is Anthony Sena. I'm with Janssen, and my co-host here for the time is Aniek, if you want to give a quick intro.
Yes, I'm Aniek Markus, and I'm a PhD student at the Medical Informatics Center in Rotterdam, and I'm working on treatment pathway analysis and explainable artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and my focus tends to be on the software side, the open source development pieces. So I may get bogged down in talking about tools, which is maybe not what everyone is here to talk about. So I wanted to just open up the floor and see if there's any particular characterization topics or studies that you guys wanted to talk about or advertise a bit in the community. I see Erica hiding. Do you want to talk about your study? Take that as a no. Okay. I guess
Anna raised her hand.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah, Anna, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's actually not a discussion about an ongoing study. It's rather a question I got from somebody, which A, I didn't have an answer to, and B, I was also kind of interested in this topic as well. So we have this treatment pathways, right? And I know Aniek has been working on improving some of the packages for treatment pathways. And my question was, can we use the existing infrastructure to do the studies, not based on the drugs or procedures, but based on the conditions? So essentially investigate not the treatment pathways, but like disorder pathways, I guess, or something like this.
Yes, I understand your question. Yes, definitely that's possible. Both actually in the existing tool that there is in Atlas, because that's fully based on cohorts, but also the package that I created, and maybe for the others that don't know this package, I started off from the Atlas tool we have on cohort pathways, and I created an R package that's then fully customizable to the specific study, but also this package is based fully on cohorts. So as long as you define the events of interest, which could be treatments, so for example, drugs, but also conditions or procedures, this package is usable like that, and you can create a pathway.
Gotcha. I definitely will try it out. Thanks.
I see Andrew has his hand raised.
Yeah, so maybe a general observation. I think our ability to characterize conditions far outstrips our ability to characterize care. And we, not just the OHDSI community and its tooling and methods, but in doing observational research on large-scale healthcare data, tend to isolate kinds of interventions of interest for particular populations and focus on that and give a lot of attention to how to properly select the populations of interest and define the outcomes and make sure we can define them well and so on. And often people's experience of other kinds of treatment modalities and so on are of secondary interest, mostly things that are excluded rather than characterized, so that we can isolate the effects of an intervention. But so just in terms of characterization, I think is a very broad comment, but I think it would be one area to advance all the work that we do is to have a more systematic and comprehensive approach to characterizing all of the care that people get and kind of give the same attention to that characterization as we do to all of the problems that they have and that sort of thing. And so I think the tacit assumptions of how we build our tools and characterization studies are to kind of isolate elements of care in order to understand them better, rather than to comprehensively capture and define them and characterize them. And so that isn't a specific ask for a specific tool or method so much as an observation of sort of something that I think is important in this area.
Yeah, if I could comment on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, what you propose is to take a more holistic view of a patient, of a person, not necessarily focus on any specific disease area, but really to capture the whole picture for individual patients.
I wasn't even actually proposing anything, Aniek. I was observing this. I think if I were to make a proposal, it would be something like this: to assess what the gaps are in our current abilities to really give a confident and comprehensive picture of all of the care that someone is getting, and to have a more grounded approach in how to take that information into account in all the other work that we do. I think we have a good, solid approach, but it tends to, as I say, be predicated more on we just want to isolate this particular type of intervention and compare it to this other type of intervention. And when faced with the complexity of all the challenges of characterizing care, what we tend to do is say we want people to be treatment naive in order to say this is a clean look at treatment A versus treatment B, or we only want people who are in a particular area. And I think it's a large task to do that comprehensive assessment and develop methods that fill in the gaps of what we currently do and develop the theoretical approach for how to relate that information to assessments of treatments or predictions or the other kinds of work that we do. So I wasn't making a specific suggestion or proposal so much as saying, I guess I worry that not having that comprehensive picture and not having a well-grounded approach for taking all that information into account, we probably miss a lot that's important and maybe mischaracterize some things.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I'm thinking about this in terms of some of the tools that we currently have in the tool stack. So if I think about feature extraction specifically, if we ran that against a cohort, we could literally grab every covariate for a person across all the different clinical domains. So we have this capability within the community to, I think, assess all of the various things that will show up at baseline or post-index for a cohort. There's a real challenge in terms of navigating that space and finding the relevant nuggets. That's been kind of a constant with some of the large-scale characterization studies we've done, is how do you actually go about finding those relevant bits and then feeding those into some of the other characterization methods that we have, like pathways and incidence rates and so on, where you need to make choices around what is it that you want to measure in those regards. Just trying to keep to the order in which I'm seeing hands up. So I see, I think it's Brianne.
Hi. Well, Andrew, you brought to light something near and dear to my heart. I love health services research. And so I've studied health services in a Medicare population for years now. And, I've never done it in an OHDSI thing. And I'm sort of new to all this still, even though I've been here for like a year now. I still have no idea what's going on. But the idea of studying health services within this context, I don't know what's ever been adapted from the, accepted tools for measuring metrics of care quality and how they've been adapted to the OHDSI setting. I have no idea, but they exist. And there's no reason why we couldn't implement them in this context. So I guess there's no reason why we couldn't do health services research by adapting the existing tools to this context and making them, more appropriate for research here, right?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that space, so I think on the surface I would say sure, but I think in other efforts we've tried to use like health quality assessments, and so sometimes those coding practices can differ, and so it makes it a bit of a challenge. But I think on the surface I agree with you there. Patrick, you had your hand up.
Can I just comment very briefly on Brianne's thing? So I think, Brianne, there's an effort between HL7 and OHDSI to align, and it's got 3 different use cases. One of them is around care quality. There's a whole large interest in making FHIR, which all EHRs are going to use, but don't currently use in an automated way, to collect the numerators and denominators that HEDIS measures are composed of and that kind of a thing, but to make that a more automated process, less of a hand-done process. And as a byproduct of that, link together the care quality indices with all of the machinery for doing research. And so that's where I started my career at Kaiser. I did first 4 or 5 studies was all around that. Part of that, you should definitely join in on that. That'll have large implications for both communities if that really becomes a standard and there's movement in that direction. So I think that's afoot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's how I did my dissertation work. I loved it. And that's what I used to do at the fire department in New York, too.
Different fire. So I was going to just connect Anna's question with Andrew and Brienne's observation about opportunities for characterization in the quality space. One of my reflections on the work that we've done in the characterization space in general is that we are leaning heavily into this idea that we can express most characterization analysis through the representation of cohorts, which represent durations of time that individuals belong to some characteristics for a given unit of time, and that we can basically do interval algebra against those cohorts. And what's been remarkable to me, and I didn't fully appreciate the power of this maybe 5 years ago, but I certainly see the tremendous power of this now, is that if we can build cohorts that represent intervals of time that someone belongs to some criteria, whether that be a disease phenotype or a drug exposure, or, and the question I'll pose to Andrew Brienne when you talk about quality is like being in the state of observation of a quality metric or whatever. But if we can create those cohorts, then we can actually build a very robust set of analyses that do interval algebra against cohorts to perform activities. And by abstracting out whether you're talking about a drug or a condition or a quality state into just a cohort object in this interval of time, it allows for us to do a very, very wide range set of types of analyses, whether it be characterizing temporal observations before, during, and after that interval, whether it be characterizing incidence and prevalence of occurrences, whether it be characterizing treatment patterns, as Aniek's excellent work has done, whether it be identifying confounders and risk factors that may influence estimation and prediction studies. There's a wide range of things that we've demonstrated successfully can be built off of the idea of first creating cohorts that represent intervals of time, and then secondly, performing standardized analytics that just do interval algebra against them. That's all that's actually happening across most of our analyses. I am familiar with the quality improvement space that largely does fall into the same framework. That is, there is some set of people at risk, and you're asking what subset of those patients at risk, whatever, have the quality activity take place amongst them, which is basically interval algebra across a cohort of people, and then the subset of those people who actually satisfy the criteria. I'm curious, Andrew, with your observation of that we're not doing as much as it relates to characterizing care, whether there's specifically different analyses that can take advantage of cohorts, or whether you have a premise that suggests that cohorts in interval algebra isn't sufficient to try to tackle the types of characterization questions that you might be interested in.
I think cohort and I think the framework that OHDSI currently uses is entirely appropriate. My observation was just that we don't tend to care as much about whether we're getting right all of the things that have happened to people in their care as we do in characterizing what kind of, do they meet a caseness or an outcome definition. That's where we spend our effort. And so, prior failed treatments, ancillary treatments not observed, but that could be inferred, are not things we give as much attention to. And so that complete characterization of the total package of care that people are receiving in these huge data sets across these huge populations is not something we've spent a huge amount of time trying to characterize. And I think it's, but for good reason, it's complex. It isn't the way you naturally approach things, but I think the overall framework is well suited to the kinds of questions that are done. I'll say just very briefly what I did, for several years at Kaiser. We'd take things like HEDIS definitions and look, if the measure was meant to be impacting subsequent cardiovascular health or strokes, we'd construct a person time quality measure at a provider level or at a clinic level, and then look at the incidence rates of those outcomes, strokes and health, of various, AMIs and so forth, over a relevant period of time afterwards to see if the care quality that was supposed to impact the outcome actually did. And the main thing I want to communicate is, at this point, these care quality measures are often box checking exercises that happen at healthcare institutions at a certain time of year where everybody scrambles to try and get everything done, and they're done in an ad hoc and unsystematic kind of a way. And they're done a lot for PR and other kinds of purposes rather than actually driving healthcare improvement, which is their original intent. And by relating them to real outcomes and seeing how a difference in a care quality measure actually leads to differences in health, we can restore its original purpose of really helping to drive improvement and change. And I think that's the promise of doing this. I guess the concern I expressed is even the approach that we took then was just missing a ton of what was happening to people. We still had this fairly narrow view of the type I'm saying, we currently have in OHDSI and in the field in general. And I think I'm worried about what the implications are of that. What is the implications of the people failed on a prior treatment, or they're getting some other kind of thing that we don't see, and we're not including that information in how we evaluate stuff. I think we just don't know the answer to that until we do that work, but it worries me. That's my main point.
Can I make a just quick comment? This sounds to me as a phenotyping challenge to me, because what we are talking about is phenotypes. And if we are interested in compliance to diabetes medication, that's a cohort definition. If you're interested in hemoglobin A1C testing, that's a cohort definition. So it sounds like if you have these cohorts built out, like we did with the phenotype February, and we continue to do this more and more and more, we can use those cohort definitions to do all the things that we're talking about: quality measures analysis, healthcare utilization analysis. And tying back to what Patrick said, if you start thinking about components, components being cohort definitions, and cohort definitions being assembled together to generate characterization report, which could be rates or proportions or incidence computation, we have a solution. So it all boils down to phenotypes.
I guess leave it to the guy who runs the phenotyping work group to add that in there. Just to keep an eye on the hands that have been up for a minute. I see Victor first and then Katya second. If you want to jump in on the conversation or propose a new topic.
Yes, thank you for giving me the word, Anthony. So I was wondering, is it appropriate now for me to talk about my experiences regarding the drug utilization package? Okay, I'm getting
Sure.
a lot of nods and thumbs up. Sure. So we at the Erasmus Medical Center, we're now basically in the process of adapting like our cohorts of the drug utilization package. So drug utilization package uses drug A or classes A, but we're interested in other drug classes in different populations. So what I noticed is that for a newcomer like me, it's quite tricky to actually adapt the package. And because it takes a lot of insight in the code to see what is exactly happening, and already by itself, running the package as it is after, I don't know when the last update was, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, that was already quite a challenge. But with the help from some PhD colleagues, we managed to do it. And I was wondering, yeah, if there's like any interest in the future within OHDSI regarding parameterization of these kind of packages so that they're more adaptable to new study ideas, and also if there's some kind of interest in whether there can be, let's say, there could be a production of more of some kind of instructions more suitable for newcomers like me, and maybe many other people coming from a field that's not per se related to informatics. So yeah, that's where I want to leave my experience at.
Perhaps it's to comment a little bit on what Victor raised. Anthony, Victor is using your package that you generated, and he's customizing it to another drug. And I think that's what he is experiencing. And the idea is, I mean, it would be indeed good that whatever drug we want to investigate, that by in an easy way identify these drugs, that we can have a run of the package and have information on the incidence and prevalence. I think that's the comment that Victor wanted to make.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense.
Someone wants to comment, or I know that this will be part of Darwin also, but of course for other people within the community as well. But I don't know whether Patrick, you want to comment on that, or whether Anthony, you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So I think the package that Victor is attempting to use, first of all, I should probably apologize because it's probably my fault that it's hard to use. The second part is the kind of the evolution of a lot of the packages that now exist in the community is kind of like we built them for a specific purpose to tackle a specific problem, and then there's this iterative approach to try and generalize them and potentially even break them into smaller components that we can reuse. So within that particular package, I had some SQL for doing incidence rates, prevalence, and some other operations. And so what has been happening, maybe a bit quietly in the OHDSI community, is we are, at least on the incidence side, like building out a cohort incidence package that is specifically designed to take any sets of cohorts as inputs to do the incidence calculation, so we could reuse that in the context of drug utilization. Same goes for prevalence, although that one, for me at least, has been on the back burner. And so for a lot of these things, formalizing them into smaller bits and then providing more adequate documentation around what is the use case, how do we, model the inputs to feed into those packages, will allow us to compose, I think, larger and larger characterization packages that we could use for different tasks, such as drug utilization or like the quality assessments that Andrew was bringing up. And so that's something I think as a community, as we tackle some of these bigger problems, we can start to think about decomposing them into smaller bits that we can reuse.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Katja and Victor, that as a basic philosophy within our OHDSI community, we really want to support open source development in such a way that we're building tools that can be used by anybody and can be developed by anybody, so that they become really, truly community resources that everybody can kind of take advantage of and contribute to. And the way we're doing that right now is we're creating an open environment where people can kind of develop and play out ideas. And then once an idea seems like it has some legs and to be formalized, we're trying to graduate some software development projects from being where they started into our Hades ecosystem, which is where we're actually like trying to professionalize the code, making it something that we really can recommend as a best practice, and making sure that that code really does meet all the use cases that the community has. Mm-hmm. So if I were to just use some illustrative examples, I think the drug utilization package that Anthony started isn't yet actually even on the roadmap to get into Hades, because we're still at the point of development and thinking through the process. So, Victor, you saying like, can we figure this out? Like, absolutely, that's kind of right where we're at. Whereas like the work that Aniek's been doing on treatment pathways, Aniek and I had a very productive conversation just last week where we talked about the next step. She's now really built a very, very nice package that people should take advantage of. And we think that the next step is to just take it to the next step of formalizing unit tests and making a version that really is bulletproof, so that we take that capability that Aniek has developed and get it out to everybody in a way that everybody can take advantage of. And so I personally look at drug utilization as a type of characterization reporting that embeds within it a variety of different types of characterization analyses, such as incidence, such as prevalence, and such as feature extraction. And as a community, I think the opportunity for us is to collaboratively design what we think would be a best practice drug utilization report that we think covers the components that are needed. Where necessary, build new analytic capabilities to perform types of analyses that are not supported by existing capabilities. I think in drug utilization specifically, for example, like we don't really have a mature way to handle dose analyses in a kind of a generalizable way. But that once we kind of have a tool that we really feel like we want other people to use, then it's a matter of us transitioning from a research project and a nice proof of principle into a tool that we develop with the expectation that the community can take advantage of it for their own needs.
Okay. I had some other comments, but perhaps for sake of time and other people.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands raised. But
Okay. No, I think 2 comments. I mean, the idea from Andrew with regard to quality, I really liked, but I think a lot of people thought it was a very good comment. I think characterization works well if we have, of course, a good visualization, which helped in the case of Aniek. So I think that's important to consider as well, because you get wealth of data, and interpreting that wealth of data just by looking at numbers without visualization, I find that hard. And then perhaps what I was thinking, which we perhaps underuse still so far, is we look at conditions and exposure, but like measurement, I call it measurements. I don't know whether that's the best wording, but they are probably still underused. What do we have as measurements? What are the abnormal results, and so on? I think that could be in nice characterization as well.
yeah, there's a good number of comments in the chat, so I was going to just see if any of those folks want to jump in here on the conversation. I'll call out Harold. Oh, Brianne was leaving. Never mind. Thabir, if any of you all wanted to jump in here, that would be great. If not, we can ask others if there's any other topics they'd like to discuss.
I just to follow up on my point about cosine similarity. We're doing a little study at Hopkins. We're looking at billing codes, visit codes, and problem set codes, and showing how the Venn diagram of those condition codes varies by specialty, maybe even disease. And I was trying to look for different distance measures between Venn diagrams. Right now, looks like the cosine similarity is the best one. But I've always wondered if there's a measure of documentation that we could use for a site, especially in a distributed space like this, rather than simply having site as a covariate is very unsatisfying, and trying to figure out what does it mean that two sites are similar enough in how they document care, then you can put them together in a phenotype. If they're very different in how they characterize care, the cohort rule would probably not work, would mean less. So you need a way of saying which sites belong together for your cohort definition and which ones should be separated. So if anybody knows of a measure that's better than cosine similarity for distance between Venn diagrams, I tried Hellinger distance, I tried Kullback-Leibler, I'd be very happy. But you see the larger point I'm making, Andrew.
I do. I think the work that I tried to bring into N3C early on is the closest thing I can think of. The problem is trying to infer that it's actually differences in documentation versus differences in how care is delivered versus data quality issues is where you run into problems. So you never know which of those three is actually causing the site level difference that is there. It could be a real difference that's being observed accurately, and a difference that's or a difference in aspects of the patient population that aren't recorded, or in some data quality problem in the way in which intended documentation is reflected. And so the all the work coming out of Valencia that's trying to use principal component analysis to characterize things both over time and across regions to begin to disentangle some of those is the one thing that I've come across that takes a stab at starting to get some traction on how to distinguish those things. But I think it's a almost intractable, not intractable. It's a really hard problem to solve, to tell which of those is causing the site level differences. But I want to help advance that work. I think it's really important.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands. Anyone else who wants to share ideas?
I'm just going to share one thought, and since we've got Katja on, it's appropriate to raise it since she's a core leader of it. One of the things I'm really excited about for OHDSI at large is the opportunity for us to formalize our characterization analyses. And the inspiration that I'm specifically seeing is coming out of the Darwin EU effort that Katja is co-leading with Peter and Danny. There, the EMA has been very clear about their desire to use European data, and they've actually been pretty clear about the use cases they have for how they're going to use evidence. And what's been remarkable is that the overwhelming majority of their use cases are the use cases will be supported by characterization analysis. And so many people get enamored by fancy statistics for causal inference, and lots of people are super onto the hype cycle about machine learning and artificial intelligence. But at a very, very practical level, real decisions that are going to impact millions of lives around the world are going to be made based off of characterization results. And as the EMA communicated last week on the Darwin EU kickoff webinar that Katja participated in, they highlighted use cases. And what was remarkable is literally 100% of the use cases that they laid out were the things where characterization analyses could directly fit the bill. That is not to say that they will only do characterization analysis, but it's to say maybe if we think as a community about where we can have the biggest impact, these simple descriptive studies actually would take a greater prominence in the work that we do. And we wouldn't get so hung up on fancy statistics that nobody's asking for right now. And when I look at the maturity of our OHDSI development stack, I would actually say we're pretty awesome at doing causal inference right now as a community, and we're remarkable at doing prediction analyses in our community. But characterization, there's a lot of those needs that the EMA is articulating, just using them as an example, a very important stakeholder. There's a lot of those that I would actually say we haven't yet matured, but I don't think it's for lack of our collective ability to do it. I just think we haven't focused our energy there. And so I'm personally very motivated to support Katja and Peter and Danny and the entire Erasmus and the entire Darwin EU Coordinating Center team to focus OHDSI's effort on systematic approaches to do characterization, because I can immediately see, based on how EMA has articulated things, that our collective ability to deliver high quality, efficient, standardized descriptive statistics is going to directly impact regulatory decision making in profound ways. And I'm really excited about this space, even though I know that we've got a long way to go. But I think it's an area that if we could collectively focus, we can, the bang for the buck we can have in this space, that feels to me to be bigger than just about any other opportunity that I'm seeing in our immediate out the windshield.
Well said, Patrick.
Yeah, that's great context. I was just keeping an eye on the time. We got about 1 more minute, so last call for comments or points.
I think I would like to take the time to thank you all for the effort that you made to be with us and also to answer our questions and to give all the information provided. Really happy with it, and I look forward to more interactions and yeah, future sessions. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for participating. It was a good discussion.